Good. Welcome. Thank you for coming to this session. So we have a number of themes to cover in this. It's essentially what we're trying to do is give you a concept of what an employee value proposition looks like. My suspicion is that you all have propositions of some sort. I was going to do a quick exercise, but we've got a very sort of compact period of time. So humour me if I can do something very quickly. Will you put your hands up, please? Put your hands down if you don't have an employee value proposition. So your hand is still up if you have an employee value proposition. Yeah, good. That is defined, i.e. written. And so you can put your hands down as and when these things start to not apply to you. That uniquely defines the proposition for your organisation against your competition. That is well understood by your employees. That informs your reward. Oh, there's no one with their hands up. And informs your reward programs. So we're going to cover off some of the aspects about the employee proposition, sort of why it's important now, and I think we also wanted to make sure that what we do is also cover a bit about analytics. And why really that you need evidence to support the development of an EVP. And I don't mind what you call it. We call it sometimes an EVP or total reward proposition or employer brand, all those sorts of things. But they're all synonymous as far as I'm concerned. It is about making sure that you've got a compelling story that really attracts, retains, excites people so that they do their best with you. And then what I want to talk about is partly as reward and benefit professionals, you want to make sure that what this is doing is informing the nature of your programs. And then the EVP is also very important because it is a communication device. And often we find in organizations that those two things are disconnected. So I want to talk a little bit at the end about the importance of communication. And I'm sure you won't disagree with anything that I say. And when I say that there's also more we could be doing, I think, with employees regarding the communication of their reward frameworks, I'm sure you'll nod along with me. Anyway, so these are the answers to some of the questions that I posed earlier. So this was a piece of research we did about a year ago, and we asked 200 organisations some pretty basic questions about their EVP. So only 50% of those organisations said they had one, and I noticed when I asked you that question, I think about half the hands went down, so nothing seems to have really changed over the last year. There was something about, we asked them how many they have. And a lot of organisations, of the 50 that said they had them, half of those said they had one. The rest said they had more than one, which was quite interesting. And it was something like 5% said they had more than 3 EVPs. There's this question about whether it uniquely defines your organisation. So when we look on websites, and which we do, and we look at the words that are used on the career pages to describe the proposition, it is always full of superlatives. This is the best this, the best that, best career, best leadership, best rewards, and so on. And we think there is something about the integrity of the employee proposition that's really important. There is that, and also we ask about the extent to which the proposition sort of does fall down into your reward program. Does it define them? 78% of organisations said it didn't really, to at least anything more than a moderate degree. And also this thing about the connection between what you say and what you do, which is really important through the proposition. So to what extent does the proposition reflect the actual experiences that employees have? And again, 50% of the organisations kind of felt that there was a bit of a disconnect, so it didn't really to any moderate degree. So one of the things we do is go onto websites when we're having initial conversations. So this is analytics at its finest. So we go on, and I don't like the term, but I think it's called social scraping or scraping social media. But we go in and we do two things. We look at your own websites and we see what it is that you say about a career within your organisations. And then we go onto LinkedIn and Glassdoor and Zing and the Job Crowd and lots of other websites. Because these days social media will not be your friend if you are advocating one thing and behaving in a different way. And you can be sure that employees, if they feel in any way disenfranchised with the promise that you've made, that they'll be posting their views on social media. So this is just an example of an organisation that talks about lots of amazing things that you like to experience when you come into the organisation. And this is the result of social scraping. So it talks about being out of touch, inflexible. There's always good things in there as well about good hours and interesting reflections on work-life balance. So we think it's really important that there is a connectivity between what you say and what you do. And this is a model for thinking about an EVP. It's the one we use primarily for having the discussions with clients to progress it. And we think foundationally you have the tangible things, so the compensation and the benefits, so the pay, the incentives, recognition plans, which seem to be much more common these days, and the benefit arrangements, the tangible benefit arrangements kind of slot across the bottom. They have cost. And they're typically what organizations focus on if they're trying to buy talent into the organization. So the purpose of this model is really to partly think of the structure of the total proposition that is engaging. It's also partly to think about the engagement model and how, the investment model, and how you choose to spend money in the wisest way. So buy-type organizations, as I say, will focus on the bottom. It is an expensive strategy, typically, and it is what you will need to do if you need to lure people out of competitive organizations. The middle strand, so around careers and well-being, is the predominant focus for organizations that are building, as you would expect. So what kind of investment, what's the right level of investment that you want to make in the development programs that you offer? And we'll talk a bit about well-being in a second. And the thing that's emerged quite recently in our model, and as we see it in others, is what we call the purpose segment at the top. So organizations are trying to engage with employees beyond what it means to work for this organization, but also think about the purpose of the organization. It's what it provides to its clients, but also, and you may find this in your organizations, and you can tell me afterwards if it's true or not, I think there's a bit of a love-in going on between people in HR and people in corporate social responsibility roles. So the corporate social responsibility people have been looking outside at supply chains and all sorts of good things like that, ensuring that you're not perversely abusing people that support your organization or the communities that you touch. I now think that they're spending more time looking internally, and that is driving certain changes in the way that some programs offer. So we see a lot of interest at the moment in things like living wage for large global organizations. It's also about helping employees and feel like they're doing good. And we know that this is a really compelling part of the proposition for younger people, is that they like to work for an organization that does good in the communities that it touches. So that, again, influences some of the aspects about the programs and things that companies offer. I said we'd perhaps talk a little bit about well-being, because, again, it seems to have emerged more recently as one of the pieces that organizations are focusing on. And we typically see there's probably actually about 8 dimensions associated with well-being, but here we've classified sort of 3. There's something about physical, so organizations placing quite an emphasis on ensuring that from the point of view of physical health, what you don't have is employees crossing what we call the wellness barrier from being either healthy or at risk into being sick or long-term disabled. So a lot of investment in programs, and it's more than fruit baskets on a Tuesday. It is about smoking campaigns. It is about sort of digital platforms that give employees access to doctors, which they may not be able to do directly from their home locations, but you can have online doctors that can prescribe and PDF prescriptions and things like that. So there's a lot of emphasis on helping employees with the physical. A lot around emotional. How can you help employees be more resilient? And also, because that aspect is less visible, how can you train managers to ensure that they are actively able to assess emotional issues going on with their employees? And somewhat connected to that is the financial. So there's something very sort of supportive and functional about some of the programs that we're seeing being introduced around debt support. So we're seeing organizations building programs that are more supportive for young people, which is either to help them release debt that they've accrued from studying, or to accrue savings so that they can invest in property on a more effective basis now. And also there is stress associated with debt. So those two things are somewhat interlinked. There are some shocking statistics. There is an FCA report that came out last month that is worth looking at the state of the nation as far as debt is concerned. And the statistics around the extent to which people rely on very expensive short-term loans is quite shocking. So, and that forms a distraction for employees at work. But all of those segments, I think, are really important, and building a proposition that defines your organization is kind of fundamental. If you haven't had the chance, I would strongly recommend you go on to mercer.com and download a free report called Talent Trends 2017, or you can wait till early next year when there'll be a 2018 report. But what we do each year is we survey a number of organizations about what executives think about the future of the organization, what heads of HR think about the programs that they offer, and what employees think, and we try and draw some associations between those things. What we found is that there are a number of factors that are effectively disrupting the job markets. You'll know about that. And I think that what that's resulting in is disruption in the way that the reward programs are operated. And I think that, coupled with the optimism that seems to exist in chief executives' minds, what we're seeing is a change, and I would call it a bit of a tipping point in the way that reward programs are operating at the moment. So historically, what we've seen over the last few years is a very strong emphasis on control and rigor and structure and framework. I think we're entering into an era where there is going to be more delegated governance around the way that the reward frameworks operate. So we're seeing businesses expect more control over the money that they spend, and that is going to change fundamentally the way that the reward frameworks may operate. This is then, very quickly, some of the research from the Talent Trends 2017. So up until now, we've kind of convinced ourselves that people don't necessarily work for the money. Well, apparently they do. According to the piece of work that was published earlier this year, it came out as the #1 factor in terms of employees' preferences. But there was a slight change there in the sense that people were looking for a little bit more than just more money. They want to be recognized for a wider variety of things. So the old pay for performance message, I think, is a bit tired. What we're seeing is people wanting to be recognized not only for their outputs, but they also want to be recognized for their contribution in other ways. They want to be recognized for achieving what they do with the right forms of behavior, and so on. And a strong interest at the moment around pay progression being linked to competence seems to be coming through as one of the themes. Emphasis on health, I've talked about a bit, and I think that's wellness as well as the programs, the benefit programs that are operating. There's something around career that comes through quite strongly, which is up to now, I think we've been living off a bit of a mantra which says we offer all the facilities to employees, but we expect them to make best use of those. I think actually employees are looking for more support than that. They want their careers to be curated. The managing money thing we talked a bit about, and quite an important theme I think that is emerging, has done over the last probably 18 months, is linked to work-life balance and very particularly the areas of flexibility that employees are looking to have supported. And that's more than just can I work here or at home. It is more than saying can I work a different schedule of hours. Employees are saying can I do different things on a flexible basis. Can I vary the intensity of my work over a period of time to deal with domestic challenges that I have, thinking about parental responsibilities or sandwich generation responsibilities. And I think these statistics are actually very compelling because of quite how large they are. So 56% want more flexible work, and 77% would prefer to work on a contract basis, which I was enormously surprised by. So that's a kind of a quick run through in terms of EVP. We need to focus a bit, I think, around what makes the compelling EVP and talk a little bit about some of the analytical work that can be done to support that. And that's really that first point, that you can't just guess at a proposition. It needs to be informed by evidence. Otherwise, you might be doing the wrong things, or you might be doing things that don't derive any value. And we need to think a little bit about how you mine information that exists within the organization to come up with the best outcome. This issue around personalization and flexibility will come through in a minute. The holistic nature, I think, comes through by offering something that is broadly within a broad proposition. And also the cost-effective nature, since the business will expect to see some sort of returns on the investment. So mostly we find that when organizations are thinking about building that proposition, they rely very much on the feedback that they get from employees, or they get back from leadership meetings, executive interviews, those sorts of things, or they might look externally on social media or do exit interviews and so on. But that's what we mainly call say information. We think there's much more interest in looking at some of the do-type statistics that sit within organizations. And that is trying to connect, really, the demographics of the organization, the programs that you operate, with some business outcomes. We think a lot of the, who thinks about generations these days? Is that something that, yes, David, no, David? Yeah, okay. I'm not sure, two camps. We talk to a lot of organizations that quite like the structured methodology of thinking about what a baby boomer or Generation X or Y thinks about. We think there is also a field of employers that think, well, those generations have external validity, but actually we ought to think a little bit more about what are the generations that sit within our organization. So, I mean, it goes without saying, really, that you'll have people of different. Well, it's useful to mine your own information to come up with your generational model, really, and that's more than just a system of age. It's often linked to a whole lot of other things about location, their needs, behaviors, and so on. And then that information is used to think about the preferences of those people, typically, and start to build some frameworks off the back of that. Just going to run through a couple of case studies that show some of the work that we do. Some of them relatively straightforward, because I don't think analytics is necessarily a complicated thing. This is what we call an internal labour market map. We're looking at levels within the organisation. We're looking at the number of people within the organisation, which are the white bars. The blue bars are the number of people who are promoted each year within the organisation. The green are the number of people who come into the organisation from outside, and the orange are the ones who tend to leave. And in this particular case, the organisation was concerned about the levels of turnover. So we produced a map. We were able to click through and look at the demographics and some of the issues associated with the populations of people there. So who are the promotees? Who are the leavers? And the issue here was that they had a grading structure that was quite granular. It's a smallish organisation, has something like 1,000 people, and we would expect probably an organisation like that to have fewer grades. In this instance, because the grades were quite hard to distinguish one from the other, it was very easy to kick the tires. And what you had was some employees who were demanding, requesting, that they be moved up the organisation. So there was very poor governance over the structure, and what you had was a tendency for some people to be promoted, and that was alienating 3 or 4 others every time they promoted one. The promotees, if you looked into it, didn't have a performance profile that was any different from the steady state. And if you looked at the leavers, they tended to have a higher performance profile. So the organisation unwittingly was allowing people to be promoted because they thought they were solving a problem, but ultimately what they were doing was alienating others. The promotees tended to be men, and the people who left tended to be women. So they really had an issue with their career frameworks, and we spent some time trying to help them understand really what a career progression looked like within the organisation, and then what were the appropriate rewards to ensure that that was appropriate. This is not a study I was involved in, but it's the kind of analysis that we do. This was for a US organisation. It's very simply trying to draw some associations between turnover and characteristics of people or programs. So just taking you down, for instance, the top ones, you tend to find that where pay is higher, there is an increased probability of people of increased probability of people leaving. However, where there has been a decent pay increase, so for every 5%, that had an 8% effect on decreasing turnover. And then other things come through. So you can start to build some pictures around what it is that you might want to do to invest in building a proposition maybe that has a more sticky nature to it. The final area, we'll quickly run through, is just the area of communication. And it's really important that employees understand that they know where information is, they understand it, and also that those programs are applied to them in a fair and consistent way. And we're seeing, I think, an emergence of better technologies for communicating. I think as a general rule, what we find is that employees they hear a message from both the company and their manager, which is that the company will reward excellence, and definition of excellence may be clear, it may not. And then their manager tends to say that you're excellent. And then when it comes to budget distribution, the manager doesn't have a budget to reward everybody excellently, so there tends to be a bit of, or a lack of differentiation in the way that those awards are made. So excellent employees, or which most of them feel they are, aren't rewarded excellently, and you tend to find that they're disenfranchised. But there's a lot more, I think, in the way that employees expect to be communicated with using a digital platform. So we're seeing the development of these sorts of social media type frameworks where people can click in, they can see stuff, they can also make decisions around the frameworks that are on offer, and those in themselves but then become very useful sources of information to inform the design of future programs. And this, I think, is this is kind of the penultimate slide, I think, but it's really the compelling proposition for spending a bit of time and effort on building communication well. So we know that on the whole, 48% of employees feel satisfied with their rewards. Where they feel well communicated to, then that increases to 60%. Where they feel that communication is poor or they don't understand the basis under which they're rewarded, that drops enormously to 17%. So there's a kind of 4 to 5 point time multiple difference between those employees who understand and don't understand and the levels of satisfaction. So we would advocate very strongly that if you were to spend money on employees in terms of their proposition, that building a strong communication program would be a worthwhile investment. I have two extra. Are these slides going to be distributed? Do the slides go round to the participants? Yeah, okay, there's 2 slides here of just fun stuff. I'll leave it at that. But it gives you an emphasis, I think, in terms of what organisations are doing. They're focusing on sabbaticals. There's a real emphasis on things, as I said earlier, like recognition plans. There are organisations who are supporting employees with challenging situations like gender realignment surgery or IVF. Or even having your homes cleaned. There's all sorts of things. Zappos is a really interesting organisation. Recommend you have a look at them. They do some unusual things like cascade bonus budgets down to individuals. So it's people that make bonus decisions for their colleagues, rather than managers. And then there's another slide. So you'll have all of that to cherish at your leisure.